Well, and hello, everyone. This is Konrad, Linda, and Mick. Today's topic is negotiating difficult conversations. As we mentioned already last week, this is one of those areas in life and business that can be a bit of a headache, whether in private or professional setting. Sometimes there is just a conversation that needs to be had, right? And yet, it doesn't come oh so easily. Maybe it's because of a person, maybe it's because of a topic, or maybe both. Well, this is the very topic of today's episodes. And so, Linda, would you like to introduce us to the very topic itself?
Yeah, so we're talking about what do we do when we'd rather not have that difficult conversation, but we need to be having it. We need to get curious about another individual. We might need to speak to our needs. And then at the end of the day, come to a mutual agreement on what it is that we both want. And really, there is a method to all of this. Believe it or not, half of the method is really knowing when to enter that conversation, being a little bit prepared for that conversation, but getting out of our head and assuming that we know what the other person is thinking, assuming that we are conveying what we want when we haven't said it. Those are all of the things that will happen. And through experience as a leader in business, in my experience coaching clients, the number one reason why people don't have those conversations that they need to have is because it never occurred to them that they have this right to have this conversation and be able to speak to the very things that they would like to have. And really, once you go through and have these difficult conversations and you get a feel for how they should go, when I say should go, I mean being tactical about getting what you want and doing it in a way that feels good, then all of a sudden there is no difficulty. They're just a way of communication effectively, communicating effectively to get to that place. And so I'm curious.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Go on.
I'm really curious. Do you see it that way? Do you see it as something that the more skilled you get, the easier it becomes?
I'm curious what you're going to say, Konrad.
I would perhaps just interject to quote Jim Rohn here. At least this is what I heard, through him, this notion of don't wish it was easier, wish you were better. And that's the case with difficult conversations indeed. It's not about us hoping that things like that will get easier by themselves. It's more about getting skillful, about handling such situations, especially when there is some emotional heat involved. And I'm wondering, Mick, what would be your definition of effective communication then?
Interesting question. Well, to add to actually this question of Linda, funny that quote popped up for you, Konrad, because the one that popped up in my mind was the one where they explain confidence related to how a bird doesn't trust. Confidence is not that a bird trusts that the branch won't break. It trusts that, when the branch breaks, it can still rely on its own wings to fly. And I feel like when it comes to difficult conversations, I don't feel like the conversation is getting easier. I also don't feel like you can, I'm saying this very softly, but I don't feel like you can get better at having difficult conversations. But I do feel like that you can learn to trust on your own wings the more often that you do it. So I'm not sure. I think it's just about getting used to the situation that you're in, yet it's still difficult. It's still not a conversation you were looking forward to. You still might, lack some sort of skill set or not be sure how to navigate through it. However, you're just going to be more comfortable with that uncomfortableness. That would be my take on that. Can you repeat your initial question, please? Because I went off.
No, it's good, really good. It's so important. I want to add something afterwards, but my question was roughly about what do you think is important for effective communication?
Hmm. Yeah, I like that question because I feel like there's a big I feel like the first aim shouldn't be effective communication. I think your very first aim should be just communication. Many people just go wrong there already. They feel like the things that they're not saying the other person should just know or smell, which people can't. And I think the first step is not trying to figure out how you can be as effective as possible in communication, but just how you can communicate. Just share what's on your mind. Just feel the share your feelings, show your emotions without being fully emotionally involved. Um, but what I think would make effective communication, I guess part of what I just said, I feel like when you're effectively communicating, you can put your emotions aside. And I think that's a big part of it, where there's more of a rational sense to it. There might be emotion behind it, but that's not noticeable in the way that you say it. It's more an explanatory way of what's going on within you. Um, and I feel like that is, I don't want to, there's 1,000 points that make up effective communication, but I feel like one of them is definitely the emotional aspect of it. And I saw you nodding, Linda. Do you want to add something to that?
Oh, and I think you're spot on. It's that emotion part of it. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to have some emotion around the conversation, because usually when you have a conversation in these types of situations, there might be some heated things, frustrations, misunderstandings. You want to clarify things, all of those things. And what I have found, in order to be able to frame up the conversation, timing matters. And so in the heat of the moment, when you're having a frustration, probably not the time to go in and have that conversation. You might need to give it some space, or find out if a person is in their space to be on the receiving end too. So it's not even just about the person that might have a frustration that needs to have a difficult conversation, but is the person on the other end, are they in a place where they're ready to receive? Are they, just getting off of work? Are they running from thing to thing? Are they, any of these different things? And so, to have people in an emotional place to have an effective or a good conversation means the timing matters. And so you should consider that. But at the same time, and I've advised on this before, let's say you have a frustration in the workplace and it's escalated, and you know that you can't just not have the conversation. Well, sometimes what you can do is put that space in there, get your emotions in check, give the other person space, and find out when you could have the conversation. And I will tell you, I have seen something that was a very emotionally charged thing for a couple of people. The space was there to happen. And then when they went to approach the situation, it had already taken care of itself. That is like one area. And then there's also been other times where you put too much space in there, and then you miss the moment of opportunity to be able to effectively address the problem. So again, you're assessing the timing so that the emotions can be in check.
Yeah. Now, I certainly also, agree that the emotional component is so important here, right? It's way more than just exchanging information. The exchanging on information is quite easily done. With a few caveats here. However, what tends to trip so many people is becoming very emotionally involved. And this is where, if we allow ourselves to go under the influence of emotions, we might be saying too little or too much, and or with the wrong tone, and or in a way that the other person might find combative or hostile. And that can unnecessarily escalate a simple exchange of information and clarification, perhaps, of something that has happened, and where some better communication is simply necessary. However, when people are under influence of emotions, they might not be themselves. Therefore, people might really be saying too much, too little, or just the wrong things at the wrong time, and that will only compound. That will only have that compounding effect on the very conversation itself. So there are various methods, and this is basically a part of the skill here. When it comes to navigating those difficult conversations, is knowing thyself. Knowing when we, as a person, taking a certain side here, how would we be placed best for a conversation like that? Maybe it would be better to wait until this emotional wave passes, rather than jumping straight into conversation, for example, because something has happened, emotions are running high, and we want to address it quickly. However, the quickly might not always be the best option. As we already mentioned a few times during our calls, sometimes it's best to avoid making decisions on an emotional high or emotional low, because this decision can be clouded by judgment. Our judgment might not be the best. Emotions can take over, and this is where a whole conversation can take a difficult turn, and it leads to even more difficult conversation after that. And it's very interesting because we have two coaches here on the call. Well, three really, but at the moment we have Mick and Linda, and as it happens, I've worked with both of them, and it's always a joy. And they are always so skillful and so insightful when it comes to navigating relationships and communication. So, Linda, as a relationship coach, what advice would you give people who are about to have a deep and meaningful, difficult conversation?
Okay, so there's more than one thing that I will address, but when you are getting into having that conversation that you want to have, you did talk about not having it in that high or low point. And I think that's important. However, let's say you found that you're not in that high or that low, you're in that more neutral place. The thing that I think is the best thing that you can do to start with these conversations is by setting the stage that you want to have this conversation with a person, and you would speak to, I would like to have a difficult conversation with you. And what I want is for us to be able to express what's on our mind. And can we do that? Is now a good time for us to have a conversation where I'd like to express something that's on my mind, and for you to provide some context about that said thing. If you can put that into play, I think that will help, because then a person on the receiving end knows that the person wants to talk about something difficult, and they might know that you're coming from that place of wanting to do it in a nice, good, effective, positive way, as opposed to, I need to talk to you about something. This is really difficult and I'm really angry and mad. Well, that's not going to get you something, but I'm really frustrated about something that's been weighing on me. And can we talk about this? I held off, but I can't hold off anymore. I would love to get this out in the open, to express it and see where we can't meet in the middle, for example. Those are just kind of some extreme examples of how a person relationally could approach them.
I like that.
Awesome. Thanks.
I feel like there's this there was this story that came into my mind, and I thought I'm going to share it, and then I'll tie it into what you said. I was cycling on the bike with my dad, and I was like 12 years old, 13 years old, and we were going to go to this grown-up party and it was his friends, and I was already on the bike, like I was already gonna go, but I didn't feel like going at all. And so I told my dad, like, hey, I don't really want to go. And he was like, why? So I told him, you guys might know this from when you were a kid. At those grown-up birthday parties, basically you got nothing to do apart from talking to adults who are all going to ask you the exact same questions. They're all going to be like, how's school? How's it with the girls? You know, all these things. Are you still playing soccer? All of the general things. And I just didn't feel like having that conversation 20 times. And so I told my dad this, and he said one thing, and that sort of changed my whole way of looking at communication. He was like, yeah, but whenever they ask you that, you're part of the conversation. Do you know that? And I was like, at first I was like, what do you mean? And he was explaining, you're always going to be a part of the conversation. That means that you also get to decide what to talk about. It's not that you have to talk with this person about what this person suggests you talk about. You can step in and steer the conversation because you're part of it. And that was really the moment. I had a great birthday party. Like I was talking about to people about their job and their work and what they were doing. And I didn't even know, I'd never asked them because they were always asking me questions. And that was just fascinating to me. But that also made me realize in any difficult conversation or whatever, I get to throw up a topic as well. And whether the other person wants to take the conversation into that direction is their decision. But like you also get to decide what to talk about. So in those moments where you feel like addressing a difficult topic and navigating a difficult conversation, it's okay to, like you said, Linda, to just throw it in, which might be super scary, but like you get to do that because you're part of the conversation. And that was just really mind blowing to me. I'm never going to forget that.
And it's true. You are part of the conversation.
Right.
And sometimes people forget that conversations are not meant to be one-sided. Even in a difficult conversation, you're always inviting the other person to talk to how they see it, how they view it, how they hear it. It isn't always about the one thing that you want to get out of the conversation. You make it about, well, how can we approach this subject?
Right.
And so that's good. I love that story because very relatable that, you get into a conversation that you didn't want to really be in, and really you have the ownership that you could take it in a whole different direction.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, in many cases also, I feel that it's very much about exchanging perspectives, right? Those beautiful constructs that people, let's say, don't always appreciate. It's a bit of a case of whether it's a 6 or a 9, right? Depending on which way you're looking at the number, right? That famous exercise, 6-9 exercise. Perspective can change a lot. The same topic, the same situation, viewed from different perspectives, can still be equally true. It's the point of view is still equally valid. So it's less about, getting an upper hand in a conversation, obviously, to say something that goes without saying nearly. It's more about creating that bridging agreement, that bridging solution that brings a conflict to an end and allows a clear line of communication. Oh, I understand. I see where you are coming from. I've never considered that before. Thank you so much. I can see where you are coming from. Therefore, suddenly the situation is diffused and we can shift away from, pointing fingers at each other or doing other sort of emotionally damaging stuff, and instead focus on the merits. Because in many cases, right, it's again, it's still a good idea to talk about the very situation itself rather than the people involved, as much as it's obviously feasible and possible. Also to bring that constructive element to a conversation. Yeah, rather than pointing fingers at people and said, oh, you did this and you do. Yes, there is a space for that as well. However, However, in many cases, just a simple act of sharing a perspective. This is where I'm coming from. How do you see the situation that happened? Oh, how interesting. I've never considered that before. I can now see why you reacted the way you did because of X, Y, Z. Right?
Right. It's not so
Therefore,
much about trying to understand the action, but like the person behind the action. It's that quote about forgiveness, you know, it's not about forgiving the action, it's about forgiving the person behind the action. Sometimes we go into a conversation like this where we're trying, like, we see from our perspective this action as, you know, unforgivable or stuff like that. It's not so much about hammering on that to the person and trying to get your point across that that action is totally not okay, but more about you being part of that conversation to understand what the person behind that action is all about. Sorry for interjecting, but I got excited.
No, I think what you said is valid.
Yeah, go on, Linda.
Oh, and you know, we've been talking a lot about emotions and setting the stage. You know, there is a way to craft the conversation. And so I wanted to break it down into some steps that our listeners could follow. And so we talked about setting the stage by stating your observations. So I see that you've been really frustrated. Okay. And then you could share a little bit about that. And by saying, I understand that you're frustrated, and, or you could say, I am frustrated by this said action. So you're really, so there's that expression of the feeling. So first it's setting this safe stage, knowing it's okay to have the conversation, getting the agreement, expressing your feelings or maybe the observations of the other person. It's about being specific in that you want a resolution or you want a certain thing to happen or not happen. So you're expressing that, right? And the closing piece to this whole thing is inviting the other person to also have that same experience. So it has to be a two-way exchange, even if you're the one that's bringing something to the table of something that you're observing or something that you're frustrated about, let's say. It's really about getting that other perspective and seeing if they see it in the same way, or even validating if you're observing something correctly or incorrectly. And so really it's those things: set the stage, state your observations, express your feelings, state your need or request, and then invite the dialogue from the other person and let them have that exchange. So it's really super simple when you break it down into those components.
Thank you so much, Linda, for listening to this. Sometimes it's good to also have a certain structure. It can help, even if it is like an outline written on a piece of paper before, that you don't have to take with you, but just to clarify, right, your own position on something, or at least maybe have an outline of how you would like to structure the very conversation itself. First, I want to start with X, then I'm going to move to something, then I'm going to move to something else. So that, you know, there is no, we can then basically, knowing roughly about what's to happen, it will allow us also to focus on the very conversation itself. Rather than having to think about what needs to be had, what needs to be said, if we already know that, then we can fully focus on the conversation and the very person involved, or people for that matter. Yeah, because there also might be a group setting. And that's, you know, a different kind of conversation altogether. However, the more clarity we have before that conversation, the better for everyone. Knowing also, maybe I'm going to bring back to the equation as well, that we all have our very own definitions of every single word. So it's worth remembering that, as famously quoted, most misunderstandings are miscommunication. People just misunderstood something that was said, And that's why a situation happened. And it might be a very genuine a misunderstanding when it comes to the definition of words used. Because for somebody, for example, I don't know, security means something. And for another person, security means something else. Maybe it's about a specific goal. The very words used in that initial conversation might be understood very differently by various people. And so we end the conversation thinking that everybody's on the same page, and yet we are miles away. Miles away. That's why also it's always good to practice this reflecting back. Did I understand it correctly? Would you mind if I just reflect it back onto you so that we definitely are in agreement here? Just to make sure that we are as close to being on the same page as possible, even in daily life, right? Whether it's private or professional conversation, this tool can be used very readily. And it only takes a handful of seconds to have that confirmation that, oh, I see. Okay, now we understand each other, right? Just a minute ago, we thought we understood each other, but we didn't. However, now that you reflected back onto me, what you thought I said, and me thinking, okay, this is not exactly there, we are not exactly there yet, I'm going to still specify it better, and maybe repeating, that reflection and feedback, we can get to a point where parties understand each other quite well. And suddenly, this level of clarity is completely, transcendental, I would even call it, right? It's very much, communication is very much first and foremost about clarity. Yeah, those little details, they can be added later on. They can be added in an email or a, social media message, or one way or another. They can be this communication can be enhanced. However, especially when it comes to those big topics as well, by the way, whether it's in a relationship, I mean, a private romantic relationship, or maybe, let's say a certain aspects of a business deal. It's always good to make sure that initially we are already as close to being on the same page as possible to avoid miscommunication and therefore difficult conversations afterwards.
Yeah, I agree with that. I like what you said there about it's sort of about knowing why you go into the conversation, like just knowing that from your own standpoint. There's this thing, and I think I heard this question first on TikTok, but it's actually quite a good coaching question. It's like or like knowing from yourself, do I want to be heard or do I want solutions? And it's that there is a massive difference between the two. And when you know that from yourself and you bring it into the conversation, it's a good starter. It's like, hey, I just want to get something off my chest. Or like, hey, I feel like we're not on the same page here. Let's fix that. Those are two completely different types of conversations. And knowing that for yourself creates clarity, and being able to effectively get that across to the other person, that indeed saves difficult conversations for later. I think that's interesting.
I really appreciate that you said that, because there is a big difference between wanting to be heard, wanting someone to come to a solution. And so right there, I mean, a lot of times we think that we want someone to understand us, right? But sometimes, sometimes we're just going to be heard, and the other person's not going to understand us because they can't see it in the way that we do. And so, being heard and being acknowledged is good. Being understood, that just depends.
Thank you so much for saying that, Linda. And I feel that also these days, right, this elevated level of communication can bring so much inner peace. Also in relationships. And what I mean by that, let's say, for example, with my sister, right, we have developed this, let's say, language that whenever one of us wants simply to share something, We will just grab a call. We will just go grab a phone, phone each other up and then say, listen, I just want to speak to someone. Obviously you, right? I just want to, basically share something personal. And would you have a moment? Of course. And this is the moment where the other party creates the space. This is not a moment for providing solutions. Yeah. This is not a moment for providing advice. This is an opportunity to provide the space. Obviously, also because the other person has indicated that they are looking for that container just to speak up. Yeah. Maybe to hear themselves, maybe to clear their own way of thinking, maybe just to emotionally shift from where they are to where they want to be. However, with that initial intention behind the conversation shared, it allows both parties to be in tune. Yeah, it provides that bridging solution here, knowing that the other the other person will know what the role in the conversation is. Therefore, we can avoid a situation where, for example, one person is sharing how they feel and the other one puts on the thinking hat and tries to advise or, share a solution when there is no need for that. And this is what I've seen playing out in so many cases, both in professional and private setting. When people, they think that it's going to be so obvious that they just want to share how they feel, for example, even sometimes about a third party, but they just want to get something off their chest. And yet the other person, without knowing what is going on, they start to advise or start to coming up with solutions, ways to get there, or something else that is completely unnecessary. Then the first person gets agitated because they don't want solutions. Yeah, and it just snowballs into a conversation that then becomes, in and of itself, a difficult conversation. So by making its initial statement, listen, I just want to speak to someone. Would you have a moment? And knowing what it means, we can already provide that extra level of clarity so that the expectation is set correctly. And we can do that. I would advise, if you don't have it yet, and I mean, I'm talking here to everybody who might be, watching this video, right, this recording. If you don't have yet at least a few people that you can just phone up and ask them for a moment of their time with a mutual agreement that, it applies to both parties, obviously. However, it's a space that provides people with an opportunity to take some pressure off any situation. It's a space for sharing, confidential, loving, compassionate space where we can just offload and be heard. Then I'm inviting anyone and everyone to create such options. There is a time and space, obviously, for other conversations too. However, even for the sake of mental health and emotional well-being, it's so important to have that confidant, right? That person with whom we can safely share what's on our mind, what's in our heart, so that we can ourselves get more clarity and at the same time be understood within the very process itself, so that we don't get disrupted when it comes to that sharing that is taking place. And we avoid the situation where the other person misreads the situation and starts, advising, planning, or stepping in with their shoes when there is absolutely no need for that. And I wonder, Mick, considering how important it is for mental health to have supportive social circle, what advice would you give as a coach for people who want to elevate the level of their emotional well-being and I would also say, let's say, overall fulfillment in life.
You mean by surrounding themselves with like-minded individuals?
Well, that can be a start. But how can we then, how can we sort of, how would you pick people for the right role?
Oh. Interesting question, because I don't think I pick people for a certain role. I think they just are there and then they happen to fulfill that role. I don't think I try to mold them in my into my little squad of humans that I can just call up for this and for that. No, I think what I would say is that most people, we have so many more people that care about us and that we can talk to than we realize. Often we might feel like we're on it all alone. We might feel like we don't have anyone to talk to, when in fact there is actually a lot of people who are very much willing to listen, who are there, like they're a phone call away, or they might be one difficult conversation away. First that little difficult conversation, then they're part of that squad that I talked about. But I guess I would keep that in mind, too, to realize like there's so many people that care about you if you know where to look, which is true. But then how I would sort of assemble that group of people, I guess that just happens with an intention. I guess you get back what you put in, right? If you're going to be that person for anyone who you're surrounded with, if you're that person that people can just call up and talk to for an hour and you're willing to listen, that's essentially what you're going to get back. So as a coach, what I would suggest is to focus on yourself when it comes to things like that. Yeah, ask yourself if you're the kind of friend that you would like to have to the people around you. I guess that's a good start.
And
Okay.
I would add,
Go.
we've been talking a lot about roles, and part of maybe not how you're picking those people to be the confidant or the person that can listen to you, you state the role. Will you be that friend for me today? Will you take off your coach hat? Will you be the friend for me today? I just need you to listen to me. I need to talk about something. Or, I'm feeling all alone today. I need to drop something heavy. Can you do that for me? Well, in both of those examples, the person can decide, yes, I can be that person for you today. I'm happy to listen. You listen to my concerns and I brought them to you. Of course, I'll be there for you. It also gives the option for the person to opt out, because sometimes someone's not in a place to be able to take on that heavy stuff, and they could also say that too. And so by clearly stating what it is that you need in the role that you would like them to play, they can choose to accept the role or not. And that's how you get that person that's the right person for you in that time, based on you putting it out there, what you're looking for, and how you'd like them to show up or not show up, I guess, maybe.
Yeah. I would also add, for example, it's again a different perspective here. We talked about perspectives today a bit, right? And here we have 3 different unique perspectives on a given topic every single time we speak about things. And from my perspective, for example, because I speak to so many people, right? Every week, every month, I speak to so many people, and I also have a selection of friends. When it comes to those, especially when it comes to, let's say, those closer relationships, friends or otherwise, I tend to personally, right? I tend to pick people depending on their personality, depending on the type of a person they are. Some people can have a very grounding presence, for example. And so I know that when I need that grounding energy, that grounding vibe, this is a person I would choose. Some people, for example, are very, let's say, creative. I know that if I hop on a call with them, I'm going to get a ton of ideas and solutions if I ask for that, but they will certainly deliver on that front. Some people are great listeners. They are just effortless at it. And I know also that I will obviously respect, anything that they wish to do. However, in many cases, they will very gladly, right, fulfill that role of a good listener, because they know also that they can count on me when it's time to reverse the roles. And because I have that selection of people, it makes my life personally so much easier. Yeah, I can play a higher game for myself and other people better, because I optimized my life also in that regard. And that can also apply, let's say, to strategically building relationships, meaning networking. Maybe it's good to have, for example, a friend who is good at, I don't know, accounting or marketing or sales or coaching and so on and so forth, without being sort of over the top, let's say, business focused and asking that people just for that kind of advice. However, as it happens, people know people. Plus, those people will be uniquely skilled already. They will have a certain idea, even when it comes to tools and resources in a given area. Therefore, when it comes to managing those difficult conversations, which is the topic of today, this can also be, for example, very helpful to have a wide network of friends. This is something that sadly isn't being taught in most schools. Just how important it is to have that varying and supportive list of people whom we would consider friendly. Friendly contacts and or friends who can provide a certain perspective and angle on something that might require, for example, deeper investigation. They might at least point us at a given direction. Maybe to avoid going into a difficult conversation altogether, because they can provide a new, unique experience and perspective on a given topic. Oh, I was going to talk to my boss about XYZ, and it was looking like a really difficult conversation, and yet I just made a call to my friend, and she said she has given me a unique perspective on that particular industry. And I'm thinking, okay, so my conversation with my boss doesn't have to be a difficult conversation. Yeah, I can now clearly state what I meant back then, for example, or I can clarify the situation in a way that my boss will understand because I had that extra insight. So we can also diffuse the potentially difficult conversation by using our network of contacts. Applying the right, let's say applying, it's maybe not the best word, but asking the right helpful person to shed a light on something that was potentially troublesome. In this way, potentially averting what would have been otherwise a difficult conversation. And that might be just a phone call away. That might be literally like 1 or 2 minute conversation with someone unrelated to the situation who provides the transcendental perspective, and suddenly the upcoming conversation turns into something very smooth and pleasant indeed. So I am wondering, Linda, as our conversation is drawing to a close today, I would imagine that what would you say maybe as a parting note here? What is the best way to handle group settings when it comes to difficult conversations, for example, within a team?
Oh, yes. So really depends on what type of messaging that you're going to give. But if you are going to talk to somebody's or a group of people's behavior, you tend to need to do that in private, so you wouldn't want to do it in the group setting. But if you want to talk about the desired behavior that you want, you could talk about that in a group setting. So, praise in public, and then talk about those more difficult things in private. I think that's really important.
Awesome. Awesome. There are so many ways, and we're going to still go back to this, by the way, when we'll be talking, later on probably next month, most likely, when it comes to team building and team experiences. However, Mick, also, I wonder, what would be perhaps the best way to avoid having difficult conversations in the first place?
Funny that you bring that up, because that came to me when you were talking earlier, and I was like, should you? I think the moment that you're going to try to avoid something, you're not going to be yourself anymore. So I guess I don't think you should try to avoid difficult conversation. I don't think there's a way in which you can. Was that a strict question? Was that like? That's funny that you threw that in. Yeah, no, you shouldn't.
This is also what I was, I was hoping we're going to get to at some point, that just like we said at the very beginning, maybe as a closing remark here, try as we might, it really is about getting skillful at these conversations rather than trying to avoid them altogether. Because sooner or later, especially if we try to avoid them, we will magnetically attract them. That's the way it works.
Right.
And so it's very much about hopping on that horse, knowing how to ride it well, rather than avoid horse riding altogether. These conversations will happen, whether it's in a professional setting or a private setting, and yet miscommunication does happen. Misunderstandings do happen. Emotionally charged conversations will happen. And it is a great skill set to have, to know how to handle, for example, an intellectually and emotionally charged, difficult and charged conversation. This is something, that's a skill in and of itself, and it's a very valuable skill indeed. As we know, it's one of the essential skills when it comes to being a good team player also. Whether it comes to a one-on-one setting, working with a client, maybe with a family member. However, one way or another, it might be a group setting, it might be one-on-one, who knows? But those things will happen so that we can also become more competent and mature in the way we are. And today, we've provided a selection of different viewpoints on what it means to have and how to navigate a potentially difficult conversation. However, because we also want to lighten the load a bit, next week, the topic is innovation in business. The link to that particular episode will be shared later on. However, since we are entering spring, spring is the season of new growth. And here, we'll be focusing on what it means to be innovative in the 21st century, with so many other people hoping to be somehow different, outstanding, best. We will be tapping into innovation in 2024. And on that note, I would like to thank Linda and Mick for being here today, and you also, dear viewer. We hope that this conversation has sparked you to think differently about difficult conversations, communication, relationships, and the very nature of the game we call life that we play here. And on that note, we would like to wish you a very good day and see you next time.
Thank you.